It's time to talk fantasy football. It's time to let them know. Where you let us crunch the numbers while you crush the competition. So grab your playbooks and crack a cold one, because here's your hosts, Teak and Baney.
Welcome back, guys, to the Sits episode of the podcast. I'm your host, Teak. We're going to dive into Sits, but before we do that, we got some breaking news for you guys. First one here, UNC has hired Bill Belichick to be their next head coach. It's a 5-year deal. It's looking like close to $10 million per season. So we're going to see what Bill can do in college. He says this is what he wanted. I don't know if that's true or not. I don't know if the NFL was in reach, if the interest was there for Bill, but he's going to get a crack in college. We'll see what he can do with UNC. I know it's going to be an upgrade for UNC because Mac Brown hasn't really produced much since being there. So we'll see what Bill can do with that program, which will be interesting. But moving on to the second news story here. Ex-Falcons and Packers linebacker Devondre Campbell quit during a game. Kind of Antonio Browned it. He was starting until Dre Greenlaw came back from injury. Dre Greenlaw got hurt again during this game. During the third quarter, wanted to come out. They said, hey, get in there, Campbell. He said, nah. So it's a bad look on Campbell. Teammates are frustrated. We're frustrated. Coach was frustrated. Kyle Shanahan said you can't really recover from that for the team. You kind of lost the respect. They're going to go ahead and cut him. As a team that's going to be looking to pick him up, it's going to be tough to sign a guy and then start him with what just happened there. It really is. What does that say to your locker room? What does that say about the coach? Yes, he can help a lot of teams. I know the Atlanta defense needs all the help in the world. He is a talented linebacker. Just what does that say? It just speaks volumes to the locker room, though. So we'll see how that goes. I'm kind of interested to see where he lands. But let's get to the sits here. And we just had those two quick, brief breaking news stories. Let's start it off. I want to talk about the tight ends. And one guy in particular who's been solid, but not necessarily a slam dunk in fantasy this season. The tight end position has been rather weak this season, and that's Mark Andrews. Okay. He's sitting at tight end 7, averaging 10.3 fantasy points per game. That is definitely a respectable stat line for a tight end, but here's the catch. He's going up against this New York Giants defense this week, and that defense has been tough on tight ends. In fact, only the Lions have allowed fewer points per reception to the tight ends, and that's the Giants. So it's not the easiest matchups for Andrew. As you can see, last week he had 6 catches for 67 yards and a TD that produced 18.9 fantasy points. He is projected 10.8. Like I said, against the Giants there. Now, we know Andrews has a key part, okay, in this Ravens offense. There's no doubt about it. He's been consistent enough now to warrant starting in most of the leagues. But this matchup does make you think twice. The Giants defense has been doing a solid job containing the tight end position. So for those of you thinking starting Andrews at your tight end 1 this week, just know that while he's still a top tier talent, just to make sure you lower your expectations just a tad compared to usual. Okay. You see in the image there with the 10.8, it's projecting. Still, it is Mark Andrews. We know what he's capable of. A big player, touchdown is always within reach with Mark Andrews. Just keep an eye on this matchup and don't be afraid to explore other options if you do have a decent backup. Now, I drafted Travis Kelce in some leagues, for example. I doubled down on that and came in and got Brock Bowers. I was high on Brock Bowers. Excuse me. Brock Bowers is now obviously that tight end this year. If if you have something like that going on, or you have two decent backups, look at the matchups. If it's a more favorable matchup, hey, don't be afraid to plug and play here. That's all I'm saying. All right, because I know it's playoff week. You want to get the most points you can. That's the that's always the goal, and we don't want to leave no points out there on the bench this week. Now, moving on to my second guy here. Let's talk about Jaden Reed, okay? Wide receiver for the Green Bay Packers. Uh, Reed's a bit of a roller coaster this season. I think we can all agree, fantasy owners. Sitting at wide receiver 19 with an average of 13.4 fantasy points per game. He's had some solid weeks, and let's be honest, he's been a little spotty. So if you had him in your lineup, you know exactly what I mean. Image here last week, he had one target for 0 yards, 0 fantasy points. Projected 11.5 fantasy points this week against Seattle. I actually played him last week. I thought he was due. Boy, was I wrong. Luckily, I did survive the week in moving on, but it was a big scare for me nonetheless. I mean, it terrified me with him coming off and having that 0. But this week, like I said, Reed is facing against the Seattle defense, and honestly, it's not a terrible matchup. The Seahawks haven't been elite at defending wide receivers, so you could see some opportunities for Reed to make an impact, but the kicker is that goose egg. That goose egg that he put up, he didn't put up nothing. 0, nada. I I still managed to pull it out, like I said, but it's just tough to say. The kind of performance makes it hard to trust him. It really does, especially when it's playoff time, like I said. So, look, I get it. He's explosive. He's got great upside. But at this point in the season, you're fighting for your playoff life. Okay. It's hard to roll the dice on a guy who's been inconsistent. So if you're got safer options or more reliable targets somewhere else on your bench or lineup, I lean towards those. But if you're feeling lucky and have no better choice, Reed could always pop off for a big game. Just know that risk will be there, though. So it's been like that all season. I don't think it's going to change coming to the end of the season. So just beware about that. As long as you're careful, we're going to try to get in the playoffs, boys. We're going to try to make a little cash here. So our third and final guy here, I got Nick Chubb, okay, at the running back position here. I'm sure we all had high hopes for him heading into the season, but to say it's been rough for Chubb would be an understatement. He's currently sitting at running back 54, averaging just 8.7 fantasy points per game, which is far from what we expected from the Browns starting running back. All right. As you can see there, last game he had 48 yards, 4.8 fantasy points, projected 7.9 fantasy points, going up against Kansas City this week. Look, since coming back from injury, Chubb hasn't really impressed, okay? He's averaging only 3.1 yards per carry, which is pretty concerning, especially for a guy with his talent and pedigree. You can chalk some of that up to rust, offensive line, not clicking, whatever you want to put it towards. But it's been a tough year for him so far coming back from that injury. Now, things aren't looking much better this week for him either. The Browns are facing off, like I said, against the Chiefs. And let me tell you, this team has surrendered fewer PPR points to the running backs than the Chiefs this season. They've been absolutely stifling against the run. Okay. And it's hard to just see Chubb breaking through that defense this week. If you've been starting Chubb, it's been hard to justify at this point. Man, especially with this matchup, the way they've been performing as well. I would pivot. I definitely would pivot. I want nothing to do with Chubb, at least for this week. It's just one of those situations where the matchup isn't ideal at all. You need the perfect, basically the star cell line for Chubb, and he hasn't shown enough to make you feel confident in putting him in your lineup. I get it. He's a household name. Sometimes you just want to trust the talent. But with the way things are going, it might just be hold off and look for a better spot to start him. Let's hope he turns it around. But for now, the outlook just isn't great for Chubb. And I'm staying far away from that start this week. So I'm sitting him. I don't have him in A leagues to start him, but just forewarning those owners, we just can't start him this week for playoffs, boys. We just can't. But that does conclude our episode. Thank you guys. We appreciate the love and support. Please hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. It is totally free. We're trying to get to 400 subs. Let's get it. Let's get us there. The ride or dies. We appreciate you guys who've been here watching all the episodes. But until next time, we'll catch you next week.